As consultants, we respond to some very unique questions. As thought leaders, we equip nonprofits with the information and the tools necessary to navigate research, data and evaluation, fund development, and leadership development. Today, we focus on the most frequently asked questions from the nonprofit consulting field. We're going to be addressing questions such as, how do I get started creating a 2021 development plan? How can I support my staff through times of change? And how many responses do I need when I'm designing a survey? Join us today for Coffee Time with Masterminds, a 30-minute conversation with leaders of mission-based organizations. If you're just joining us, let us know where you're from in the chat. I'm Rebecca Tuttle. I'm the founder and principal of Grant Right Now and Grant Writing for Good. I want to welcome my colleague, Peta Blakely, to Coffee Time with Masterminds. Hi, Peta. How are you?
Great. Good morning, Rebecca. My name is Peta Blakely, and I'm the founder and principal of Blakely Consulting.
Welcome. It's nice to see you today. And we have our other co-host, Cynthia Rojas. Hi, Cynthia. How are you today?
I'm good. How are you? Hi, everyone. I'm Cynthia Rojas, and I'm the founder and principal of 2 Year Growth. Hey.
Welcome. Happy weekend.
Yeah.
Now, Peta, there's often a common misunderstanding of how do we conduct evaluations as a nonprofit. What advice do you have to clarify what evaluation measures nonprofits can start putting into place when they're collecting data and evaluation measures?
Yeah, 10 years ago, maybe even more recently than that, organizations were collecting no data and working with no measures. Now they've definitely gone, in some cases, to the other extreme. And one of the questions I get is, we have so many measures. We have like dictionaries and dictionaries of measures. We're collecting all these data points and we don't know what to do with them, and the staff is getting frustrated. So here's what's being missed is those data points are for you. They are for the program and for the staff. And what I recommend, if you have too many of them and they don't seem meaningful, is write them all down and then KonMari them, right? Go through them all with your staff. They might not all bring you joy, but do they bring you utility? Do they help you run your program better? Are they correlated with something that's really important and valuable in your program and to your participants? Do they tell you that you're doing a good job? And organize them accordingly. And then another thing that you can do is go back to funders. Sometimes this happens because you have a couple of different organizations that are asking for really similar data, so you're measuring it a couple of different ways. You can go back, push back on them and just say, look, here is the definition of this measure that works best for us, that best encapsulates why this is important in our organization. And here's what we're going to recommend and how we're going to report on this to all of our partners. And there's a good chance that will work.
That's a great point, because it's better to be honest and transparent with funders when you're evaluating your measures, because the last thing we want to do is provide a false narrative or false outcomes. I'm really glad you brought that up.
And the funders ask for this to try to help your programs be better and stronger, right? So let's keep that in mind as we're talking to them.
I think there are two things you said, Peta, that are very interesting. One is the data is for you, meaning the program. I apologize, my dog is barking. Amazon.
Good morning, Rocky.
Amazon is coming to the door. In the meantime, I'll get my headphones. And so, anyway, Rebecca, go with your question, and when he stops, I'll talk.
Okay, sure. So, Peta, do you want to?
Yeah, I want to ask you a question, Rebecca.
Okay.
Right? Because we were just talking about, working with funders and presenting data to funders. So how do you help organizations think about that when they're working with a partner like a funder? How can they use that kind of feedback in their planning, and how can they use it to develop their funding plans?
That's a great question. And there's a couple of ways. First, when you focus on that data that you originally set out to evaluate, to measure, to capture in your grant proposal, if it's not going as planned, maybe you decided to focus on attendance and the attendance is a little lower, or you've had a decline in attendance after the initial first couple of weeks of your program, being open and honest with the funder and letting them know that this is what's going on, it's really valuable, or invaluable rather, because it lets the funder know that you're really truly committed to providing them with a true picture of your community. But it also shows the funder that you really want to capture what's going on there so that you can make that difference that you're setting out to make and make improvements for your community in the long run. And if you keep that line of communication open with a funder, they may just fund you again next time because you've shown them that what you thought was going on and what you delivered made this difference. But you see now with the data you've collected that with one more of their investments, you can continue to make the difference even greater. And so really capturing that data and putting it into your plan to say, if what we tried to do didn't work and we shifted our evaluation, captured different information, put that into practice, and here's the outcome, this is what we're going to look for funding in the future, because now we understand better what our community's needs are.
Yeah, I mean, that's really the optimal way to be using that kind of data.
Yeah, one of the things that I really appreciated with what you were saying is data is really for the organization. We've shifted our focus to design data collection and data needs around a funder. And so funding streams or funders have been really guiding that process, whether or not it works for the nonprofit. And I think it's important for nonprofits to know, yes, reporting back to your funders is really important. They are investing in your programs, but also you should be looking at data points that help you improve the practice.
Right.
And also in this new landscape of equity and philanthropists are really looking at, do they have are the systems that they have in place equitable? Are they fair? Asking for extreme amount of data for a $5,000 grant is very different from asking for extreme data for a $50,000 grant. And yet some philanthropists have figured out they're not really looking at that close enough.
But, I want to touch on that because that actually comes up a lot with as a deterrent for applications, potential grantees. But my feedback as a consultant to them is, if you're willing to put that much of an investment into doing that work for that smaller $5,000 grant, then that's going to pay off in the long run, because of the level of sophistication is going to set you up for success as you build your portfolio and the sophistication of the applications you pursue in the future. So I say go for it. And funders are trying to weed out applicants they don't want to fund, who don't want to put in the work. And I see those funders as the ones who build those long-term relationships with their grantees.
Cool. And Peter, my question for you is, or another question that has come up is, can nonprofits really get to where they're having most of their impact? Can they really evaluate that?
Yeah, I get that kind of question a lot. Like, what we do is so unique and we can't count it. You can, right? In your personal life, you probably count and measure everything that's really important to you and that you're trying to have an impact on, right? So why would you apply less rigor to your professional life, and particularly when you're doing such important work? It's true, quantitative evaluation doesn't get to the subtleties of how programs work, but it should point in the right direction, right? There are very good measures out there of things like equity, things like self-confidence, college readiness, economic well-being, housing stability. There are measures of all of these things. And if that's the business that you're in, you should be willing to hold your own feet to the fire and use these measures, right? If you really don't think that what you're doing is going to impact one of those scales, then you might not be doing it, right? And you should be honest with yourself, your clients, your funders, your allies, that maybe that's not what you're doing, right? So I say absolutely.
Yeah.
There's a lot to ask the participants about how your program is working, or maybe about other effects that you hadn't even realized you were having. But if you say you're an employment program, you need to be measuring employment. If you say you're a post-secondary readiness program, measure post-secondary readiness. Otherwise, you're letting yourself off the hook. I mean, this is like me going on a diet, but then never stepping on the scale, right?
Mm-hmm. And, but people complain a lot about, not complain, but I've heard the sentence, we're very complex. And so I wonder if that becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy.
Sure. And evaluation is also very complex, right?
Yeah.
The field has evolved too. So we can account for that. We can evaluate that too. And a lot of times being complex is absolutely the right thing to do. If it's becoming a euphemism for we're not really focused, we don't really understand our strengths, and we're not doubling down on our strengths and really making sure that we leverage them to the advantage of the community, then you might have a problem.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I think when people say we're very complex, if you say anything, at least in my field with fund development and grants, if you say anything that leaves your reader saying, then you need to answer and clarify.
Yeah.
I think when people say, oh, we're just very complex, it's because they haven't yet gotten to the point where they're able to clearly articulate that complexity in a way that makes sense to the people who are listening, to the people who are reading, and people who are engaging with them. So you have to break down that complexity. At the end of the day, when you break it down, you still may very well be complex, but at least you can explain it. And if you want people to engage with you, you have to leave them saying, not, huh? Right?
Yes, I get it. Right. When I was in grad school, we used to say, if you can explain your dissertation to a 5-year-old, then you're there.
Oh, right? There you go. No pressure.
Right. Cynthia, we learn a lot from you. Oh, sorry. Yeah. Cynthia, we learn a lot from you that change is hard. And with that comes this experience of loss. How can we stay motivated in the new year with all the changes we've experienced already and that continuity of change in the coming year?
Yeah, that's a good question. And that's one that comes up a lot. So change, we tend to think about change as an event that occurs that is different from what is already occurring. So, we went from working in an office to working from home. And so we think that's change. But change is also, the biggest part of change is that middle piece, that transition, right? Because that's where you get to lean in whether you're going to be successful or whether your initiative is going to fail. And what leaders have to be aware of is that transition is mainly about loss, right? And so when you change something, creating a safe space or holding space for loss increases the likelihood of people being more adaptable. But if your staff are grieving their loss and they're having to behave in a new way, that's just too much for the mind and the heart to take on. So just creating a space for that middle piece of change, right? Before you go from what was to what will be. And then motivation. I mean, there's a whole science, and I think I've spoken a little bit about the science of motivation in that there's a part of the brain that's in charge of our decision making, and this is the front of our brain, the prefrontal cortex. And it is linked to the part of the brain that is attached to emotion. So when we make a decision, believe it or not, our brain does a little dance. It gets really happy, right? But when decision making or choice making is taken from us, like it has been in the pandemic, our brain starts to shut down, and it impacts the emotion side, and we're not as excited and we're not as motivated. And so what I've been telling leaders, whether that's on my work one-on-one or my work in workshops, is really to create space for your staff to also make their own choices or be able to decide things. Give them more autonomy, in essence. So those are two things that I want to highlight, is really creating a space for grief and loss and recognizing that that's the bigger part of the change equation. And then remember, decision making and happiness and emotions come together. So if you can create a space for autonomy, you can create a space for motivation. That's very simple, by the way, very, very simple. But I didn't think you want me to roll out the academic literature on you. So.
No, that's too complex. But it's true. We gravitate towards things that draw us over, and emotion is a big draw. So if you can connect with something emotionally, then it's going to suck you right in. And sometimes you just get lost, like a good book.
Yeah. Oh, we have a viewer, Ann Urasic from Field Partners. Hi, Ann.
Morning, Ann.
Ann says, could be a comment. I want to welcome Thaddeus to the show.
Hi, Thaddeus.
Good to see you, Thaddeus. Bring up his comment because it's very funny.
I know, it's terrible. And also,
when we were saying programs are too complicated to measure.
It's complicated, like Facebook.
Yes.
That's a great point. And Anne says it's all about locus of control. She loves it. Absolutely.
Yes.
Hi, Anne. How are you? And Renee is here with us today.
Hi, Renee. How are you?
Morning.
Nice to see you.
So we have to remember, especially during this pandemic, right? Creating space for people to feel in control. Also, rule breaking. Let your staff break a little rules. If you think about watching a 2-year-old, right, when they start to learn either the word no, or they learn that they can grab something and run, and that's not necessarily a good thing, but they're laughing. It's because they're learning to take control and break rules. And they laugh. They 2-year-olds enjoy doing that as much to their parents' horror. So if you could bring in a 2-year-old, you're gonna be okay. You're gonna be okay.
I'm just writing that comment. So keep going.
Yep.
We have more questions, I think.
Yeah, I mean, I have a question for both of you. This year has been so weird, right? Right now is the time when I start planning for my business for 2021. And I think a lot of organizations are looking ahead to 2021. And, generally we look at the prior year for history and try to anticipate looking forward. This year, that's not going to work, right? So how do we plan? Cynthia, how do we help our staff create the vision for the coming year in terms of advancing our mission and vision? And Rebecca, how do we make a financial plan or a sustainability plan at this especially weird point in history?
Good questions.
You want to go ahead, Cynthia? Amazon comes back.
I'll wait for the Amazon guy. Yes, no. I'll go. And so this is a hard one, right? Because we are still walking into the abstractness of this pandemic come 2021. There is a glimmer of hope, right? That there's a vaccine. I thought it was coming out this week. Now it's next week. And, our frontline workers are going to get it first, and then it's going to progress. And as I talk to people and I'm thinking about the summer, I'm thinking the summer is going to be very different in 2021 than it was in 2020. And I'm planning for a summer where I am vaccinated and everybody is as well, and we could start doing our work together. But we're walking into January, unfortunately, with the same, I call it abstractness. I'm thinking of a better word, but we don't know any more of how 2020 is going to turn out based on the data on 2021. But I'll tell you something. This is a time of reflection because we do have some information. We've been at this for 9 months. So there should be some getting used to some things. And I understand that this is still hard, but it's key to have a reflective practice where you think about what has been your struggle, what have been your accomplishments, and what did you get over that you didn't think you would be able to, right? And then applaud yourself. So reflect, pre-plan, right? So plan your first quarter. What's that going to be like emotionally? What's it going to be like with your family? What's it going to be like at work, right? And then prepare, and then start to take action. So reflect, pre-plan, and prepare are the three things that I would say people should begin to do now in the month of December in anticipation for January.
Yeah.
All right, the Amazon guy didn't come, Rebecca, so now it's you.
I wrote mine out because I have to write everything down. All right, so I'm a firm believer in there's nothing that we cannot do. Can't is a self-imposed limitation. And if we find that we're faced with a no, so in other words, someone might be saying, you can't do that, or no, you're not going to be able to achieve that. Okay, so let's find another opportunity and go for it. And many people in the development space did just that. They couldn't host their events anymore, so they brought their fundraising online. Or they had maybe a dip in their traditional fundraising campaigns, so they tried other avenues. Peer-to-peer fundraising is a great one. You know, we've been studying a lot at Grant Right Now what has worked in the field of development and grant writing in the past, what worked and what was a challenge for 2020. And we're planning for the hiccups with our clients going forward based on the knowledge we obtained from 2020, which we're still in, by the way. And using that knowledge as a power to achieve what our goals are for our portfolio in 2021. So don't let anybody tell you can't do something. That's a red flag for you to go out and find yourself a new opportunity. I tell my students that all the time. I mean, I was telling you guys, I had written 2 grants for my clients, and they were both funded. 2 out of 5 applicants, and 2 of them were ours. So there's nothing you cannot do.
Yeah, and next week we're gonna have someone on the show who used a cartoon, and we had a show about using cartoons to tell your message. She used a cartoon as part of her annual appeal, and so we're gonna talk to her about how that's working out. But Rebecca, one thing I've really appreciated about you is that you've always kept the glimmer of hope about fundraising throughout this year. And thank you for reminding me we're still in 2020, by the way. When you said that, I rolled my eyes. I'm like, oh, it's still
Well, for me, it's to get those last applications in and prep for the new year. So, But Peter, you had mentioned talking about seasons, right? Seasonal accomplishments. So we work in quarters in development.
Yeah, and we're bringing someone in January that's going to talk about seasons, and because we learned that our friend here, Peter Blakely, runs her business on a 12-week year, and so we're going to talk about that. So, yeah, but fundraising has taken a hit during the pandemic, and we've seen amazing innovation come out of that, and. You know, Rebecca, luckily, you are really busy because organizations are reaching out to people who can help build that capacity and let them see that we can still fundraise. There are people still giving money during the pandemic. So hopefully by now, organizations are getting a little better in that area. But it's been painful. It's been painful.
Yeah. And I think we've seen it in a lot of contexts. This year has, thrown everything up in the air. The rules don't apply, right? And that is potentially chaotic and scary. It's also potentially an opportunity. And I think we've seen it with funding partners who are very flexible with how organizations adapt. I think there's a lot of opportunity in that.
Yeah.
Absolutely. New opportunity, right? Because otherwise, what are we stuck with? We're stuck with that fear of the change, that we just can't get out of that cycle of, gosh, 2020 was awful. It had hardships, but you probably met a whole bunch of new people you'd never spoken with. Your relationships are probably a lot stronger because people helped lift up your spirits. They lifted up your organization. People came out and said, this is important, and these organizations, these nonprofits have to be here, you know? Yeah. So I think a lot came out of 2020. Now we're coming to the end, thankfully, so we can start.
I just want to add, I see, and so I just want to say before we reach the end, Anne has a comment, but Rebecca, this is why it's so lovely to be with you, is because this optimism of, you know, we're gonna be this wasn't terrible. I think it was terrible, but you know, there are these glimmers, these moments that we had, and we're better for it. And you're so right, and you remind me of that all the time. So thank you for doing that. But I think Anne had a really interesting comment about foundations and what's changing. Yeah.
She says foundations and funders are giving out much more money. Absolutely.
Yeah.
And changes in philanthropy are afoot. She's optimistic. Yes, absolutely. I'll join you in that optimism, and I believe the same. Absolutely.
Yeah. And I'll tell you something. I was talking to a funder, and I am not sure I have that I can say who it is, because they should announce it first. But they're doing something radically different, the first time in their history, to increase the giving within their foundation because of the pandemic, because they realize that they can help save some organizations. And so when that comes out, we will be sure to bring someone from that foundation to talk about it, because it's groundbreaking. It's groundbreaking what this foundation is doing. So yay!
I like that you brought it up. But remember when we were talking about philanthropists getting closer to the clients that are served in the communities? I'll bet you that's where that came from. And I think it was Anne that came on that day. We had that conversation.
Yes. Mm-hmm. And Tehran also mentioned it as well, right? Mm-hmm. Foundations want to get on the ground and hear from the people. And so, yeah.
Absolutely.
That is a plus. Thank you, Rebecca, for reminding me that there are pluses in this whole list of minuses.
Okay, so we're coming to the end of today's episode, as well as 2020, and Coffee Time, if you can believe, has been going live for 35 weeks. If you have a topic that you would like us to cover, pop that topic in the chat or send us an email. Our emails are always on the screen, and we'll do our best to invite a guest to cover it. Who knows, maybe you'll even come on our show and talk about it with us. Before we get off, I just wanted to ask, what are your takeaways for the shows today? Or what do you want to leave our audience with based on the questions that you had responded to today?
Mm-hmm. I think my number one is your data is for you. That's what I want programs to take away. I didn't answer the question about how many responses you need to your survey. So let me answer that here. There is no answer. It's a trick question. The answer is it's about surveying the people that you really need to talk about, right? So it's not about the numbers. It's about really, really getting to know your program participants or your community. And that's my takeaway. You know, take this opportunity to really get to know your community, to understand their needs, and to be nimble as a program. Cynthia, what do you want to leave people with?
I have to admit, Peter, it's really too bad we left that question for last. We're going to have to circle back, because there are a lot of nonprofits get a little nutty around statistical significance and the power and the sample size. And so I think you could demystify a lot of those things. And I'm loving what you're saying. Get to the bottom of what you want to learn.
You know, that is a great idea, Cynthia, because I know I have a solo show coming up over the holidays.
Yeah.
I will do it on that. I will do it on demystifying your program surveys.
That's so cool. That's so cool.
That's going to be cool. I wrote that word down. I was like, demystify.
Thank you. How about you, Rebecca?
I just want to leave a little plug. I have another show. It's another live show. It's called Grant Writing for Good. And on my show, my only goal and my only mission is to highlight the small but mighty work of nonprofits all over the country, all over the world. So that airs on Wednesdays at 10 a.m. And if you want to come on the show and talk about your work, talk about your nonprofit, and let us know how we can help you and spread your mission and your word, then you would be more than welcome to email me and just come on my Grant Writing for Good show.
I think that's a great service, and I already have some nonprofits that I think would love to come on. And my takeaway is really, being reminded. I mean, look at how lucky I am, the privilege to be in company with these two amazing individuals and what they teach me on a weekly basis. And this reminder that there are real positives that have come out of the pandemic, right? And then using that to reflect as I was advising. But also, I can't press enough, Peter, what you talked about in terms of using data to improve your practice. And so I guess that's two takeaways, but thank you. All right.
I have a last takeaway.
Huh. Yeah, well, Not
That's it. Well, thank you, everyone. We're getting silly now. Thanks for joining us on Coffee Time with Master.
Have a great weekend, everybody.
We'll see you next week.